In 2019, I took a security job night watching equipment in the middle of the woods at a temporary concrete plant close to the town I used to live in. It was a blessing for me to land this job at that time, and on the first night there, I relieved my uncle's best friend, who I had not seen in forever, so I knew I should be just fine there. The first few months were uneventful. I would leave the windows down on my truck, and that's when I started hearing tree limbs breaking off in the distance and gravel hitting the metal pieces of the plant. I wrote that off as wind and rocks falling off the conveyor belt. I left it at that. Sometimes I would take my dog to work with me. He was a tough dog, but he wouldn't even get out of the truck when these noises started. He just stayed on the floor all night with his hair standing up, and he would growl. I didn't think much of it at the time. Winter started, and I ended up getting a new car to save gas and be able to stretch out. The first night I drove the car to work, I parked it behind these water tanks that were on the ground. They were laid over so you couldn't see me until you walked right up on me. It was a good plan to catch trespassers, but a bad plan for everything else because it meant something could walk up on me too, and I wouldn't see them until it was too late. It was around midnight. I had just laid my seat back, and I looked over my shoulder, and I saw this giant white-gray looking thing walking up the driveway. It looked like a guy in an Alabama sweatsuit at first. I'm 6'4", and I weigh 375 pounds, and I'm not scared of anything. But Lord, this scared me. All I could think of was, what an idiot walking up here at this time of night in the middle of nowhere. When whoever it was got closer to the streetlight and I could see it, I saw that it had a tan-colored face, and what I thought was a jumpsuit was actually hair. And then it turned to look at me with that, oh snap, look on its face. Normally my truck was visible from anywhere in the area, or you could hear it pull up, and apparently I snuck in unnoticed that night. When I got a good look at it, I spun my car around and shined my headlights on it, and I grabbed my AR-15. It has a vortex scope tack light and a laser on it. In these couple of seconds, it made it to the wood line 60 yards away with the light and laser on it, and looking through the scope, all I could see was its eyes shining, and I bet they were 7 inches apart. It was cloaked like in the movies, The Predator. Being the dummy that I am, I fired 20 rounds at its feet and over its head, and it never blinked once. I wasn't going to stay in that spot any longer, so I hauled to a lit parking area to finish my shift out that night. The next night at work, I was nervous, so I carried my bullpup shotgun loaded with 1-ounce slugs all night. I heard trees falling and god-awful howls, but there was no wind or a cloud in the sky. I ended up telling my uncle's friend what had happened, and he was relieved to hear it. Apparently, he had been going through hell with these creatures. According to him, there was more than one. There was a news story a long time ago from this area about a local man's livestock coming up dead, and if I'm not mistaken, something broke the donkey's neck. This happened right down the road from the area, not too far from the woman who had made friends with them. You had her on at one time. Cam, there are several more stories just about that job site, and if you and the audience would like to hear more, let me know. I could probably write a book on it. Heck yeah, we want to hear them, man. Send them. You can write a book, but let me put them on the podcast. The man didn't say whether to use his name or not, so I'm not going to, but he's talking about the Alabama white thing, and I think the woman he's referring to is my friend Cat Rabbit in Alabama. Anyway, this was, man, what an exciting story. I really appreciate him sending it. Thank you. All right. Thanks for joining the podcast. In the last podcast I put out, at the end, I said if you listen to the end of a 2.5-hour podcast, I'd shave your name and my back. But there were too many names to do that. I can't reach back there, and my wife's not going to touch that. And I was afraid y'all wouldn't be able to read it, so I just didn't do it. So I didn't lie to you. That was kind of the intention, but it became an impossibility because so many people listened to the end. So I appreciate all you guys listening to the end. Hey, again, thanks for joining the podcast. I don't know how many stories are going to be in this podcast. I think 4, a couple of long ones, a couple of short ones. Whatever the deal, I hope you enjoy it. All right, here we go. I have a story that has haunted me my entire life. I want to know what you think about this. I grew up in West Tennessee in a small community on the other side of our town. Back in the early 60s, we only had black and white television with 3 channels. Our mom would tell us that there was no such thing as monsters, and she allowed us to watch movies with pretend monsters or aliens. The aliens at the time looked robotic and cheesy. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I slept on a makeshift feather bed in the room with my parents. One night, I was awakened from a deep sleep with a bright light on my face. I would not open my eyes because I was confused about why my mother would do that. It was not like her at all to turn on a light while I was sleeping. I waited, and the light stayed on, and I was feeling a bit cool. What is my mother doing? I wondered, in my half-sleep state. I could sense something standing at my head, and I noticed that I couldn't move anything but my pinky fingers. I felt the edge of my bed, only to feel that it had a cool metallic feel to it. I was lying on my back, and my head and feet were straight. I slowly opened my eyes, and I saw that I was naked. I was in a sterile-looking room with no windows that I can remember. Each side of me there were 2 gray alien beings, and there was one at my feet. I could still sense the one at my head, too. In all, there were 6 of them in the room with me. As soon as I focused on these things, they simultaneously leaned over toward my face. They looked alike, with their big heads and black eyes and slits for nostrils and mouths. I panicked because I had never seen such things in my life. I couldn't scream. I just kept trying, and the 3rd time that I tried to scream, I suddenly woke up in my bed. My nightgown was on, and there was like nothing had ever happened. This incident has stayed with me my entire life. I was in my mid-20s before I saw a real picture of a gray alien, and I was shocked. That picture was identical to those 6 beings. My thoughts were instantly flooded with that memory at that very moment. I have told one person about this, and when I told them, that person looked at me as if I was crazy. I've heard that when abductions occur, these people are visited on a regular basis, but this has not been the case for me, at least not that I can remember. I have had other odd things happen to me during my lifetime, but this one was one of the most terrifying. Oh, wow. You know, I get these stories every once in a while, and I hear them from people. I'm not going to say anything that I don't think this woman has thought of herself, but could it have just been a very vivid dream? And those images in your mind of these aliens could have been something you saw on television or in a magazine or in a book. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying, could these things be explained like that? Because every time I get one of these, the person is having... It's like they're unconscious, but they're conscious. It's almost like they're awake, but they're not awake. It just sounds a lot like a dream to me. I grew up with night terrors, and I can remember those dreams. I'm 62, and I can still remember those dreams from 55 years ago, just as clear in my mind as I had just woken up from them. Those night terrors, those night horrors, they imprint on your psyche, and it's like a lot of people never forget them. I would love to explain to y'all some of my night terrors that I've had. Maybe I will someday, and they're kind of silly. And I think one of my sons had night terrors at night. And you know, now that I'm talking about that, I've never asked him what those dreams were about or if he can even remember them. But now that I'm talking about it, I'm going to see him at Christmas. I'm going to ask him that. This is very interesting. I don't doubt that this woman had some kind of experience. That's not the reason I said, could it be a dream? But I'm always looking for answers to a lot of these. But I love the story. If this is something that really happened to this woman, Doesn't matter. What matters is it bothers her still today and she can't figure it out. So thank you for sharing it with us. Okay, this is a short little story about a dog. It's not a monster story. It's not Bigfoot, not Dogman, not aliens, but it's a really good little story about how intuitive dogs are. Let me read it to you. Olympia was a beautiful, gentle golden retriever. Everyone loved her. My friends used to argue over who got to babysit her when I had to go away for a few days. She was intelligent and intuitive. She knew when I was ill, and she would stay in physical contact with me all day and all night if I were ailing, her hip against mine, until I felt better. Once there was a knock at the door, and outside was a big scary-looking guy replete with leather and studs and tattoos. He had a mohawk and a mean, angry expression. Olympia became enraged at the sight of this man, and I had to restrain her or she would have gone through the screen door after him. I had never once seen her act like this. Could she smell his aggression? Could she smell my fear? Olympia's best friend was a yellow lab named Katie. Katie and her humans lived a few blocks away from us. She was a frequent visitor, and I used to take care of her when her family had to go away. If you've ever had a dog, you know that they have specific places in the house that are their very own place. Olympia liked to be on or next to my bed, and Katie used to like to hang out under the bed. Olympia never went under the bed, though, never. That was Katie's place. But one day, she suddenly went under the bed in Katie's spot, and for 2 weeks, that's where she stayed. And then suddenly, she reemerged and never went back under there again. Later, I learned that just when Olympia started going under the bed, poor Katie had died. And when I found out, Olympia's behavior made perfect sense. She was, after all, an incredible dog with an incredible intuitive gift, and I was lucky to call her my own. And that's the end of it, but I thought that was good. I wanted to share it with you because I like to talk about dogs, and dogs seem to have a sense about those things. Nobody can explain it. If you have a story that you could send me that's an unusual story about a dog or just about a dog that you love, man, send it to me. I'll put it on the podcast. I love those stories. Sometimes it's good to break away from the monster stuff and just read something good and heartwarming. I really appreciate the writer for sending this. It was late summer of 2009 in a small Minnesota town north of the Twin Cities. I was staying at my buddy John's house on 10 acres of forested land. We were just 17 at the time. John's dad built $1 million home on that plot of land with more rooms and doors and windows than you could count. He even had a gun room. John's parents were out of town on vacation in Mexico, and his sister was at a friend's house for the week, so John came and picked me up in his maroon Grand Marquis, and we went to his house. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but I remember when I got out of the car, I smelled something rank in the air. I don't really know how to describe this smell, but it made me sick to my stomach. John said there was probably a dead animal somewhere and not to worry about it. We got inside, threw a couple of steaks on the grill, and enjoyed the view from his $1 million back patio, which faced the vast wilderness and a pond surrounded by trees. And I could hear the frogs sounding out different calls, but otherwise there was no noise but the gentle breeze in the leaves. But there was that smell again. It was so bad that I had to go inside to find a handkerchief to put over my face so I could breathe. It didn't work very well, but I was thankful that it helped it a little. By the time we finished eating, there was nothing left but bones on the plate. It was dark enough that you couldn't see an inch into the tree line at the edge of John's thick, beautiful golf course green lawn. We looked at the steak bones on our plate and decided the only rational thing to do was to see who could throw them further in the woods. So we chunked them as hard as we could, and we listened to the rustling of them falling through the trees. We heard them hit the ground. But what we didn't expect were the noises that came after that. It sounded like a bear crashing through the trees. Now, bears are rare in Minnesota, but they are here, make no mistake. John and I decided to get out there and go for a drive so that whatever was crashing through the trees wouldn't be tempted to come and check us out. We brought the grill in, we hopped in the car, and we sped out of there as quickly as we could. We drove around for about an hour, listening to loud music, and made the same trip over the same roads until it was pitch black outside. It was about the sixth time that we had made that loop when I started getting a funny feeling. It was a sense of anxiety that I'd never felt, and adrenaline immediately started coursing through my veins. I felt like I was being watched by something big. I stopped listening to the music, and I was looking straight ahead. John was barely paying attention other than he was going straight. I saw a huge figure walk across the road. I couldn't see its face, but I saw the shine of its eyes. That sumbitch had to be 10 or 11 feet tall, and its arms were unnaturally long to be a human in a suit or a bear. It was walking on two legs, but it walked more like an ape than a human. And its feet were massive and flat, and I could see the muscles rippling through its thick red-gray fur. I felt fear like I had never felt before in my life, and every hair on my body stood straight up. It was like I had been struck by lightning. I remember trying to scream, and I couldn't breathe. John never saw what crossed the road, even though he came a foot from hitting it with his car. But he noticed that something was wrong with me, and he slapped me across the chest, which made me catch my breath. "What the hell's going on with you?" he asked. "It was a Bigfoot," I managed to get out. John knew me as the craziest, most fearless person he had ever met. He knew I never backed down from any challenge or any dare, anything that was stupid and could result in broken bones or death. But there I was, his fearless friend, scared straight and barely able to speak. My fight or flight response was always fight first and ask questions later. But I won't lie though, I was all flight that night. He slammed on the brakes and spun the car around to go back to where I saw what scared me. And we drove a little until I could see footprints out the window, and John turned his car so the headlights pointed into the trees. In the light from the headlights, I saw the creature standing behind a tree, and it was holding on to a tall branch. If I didn't know what I was looking for, I would have never have seen it. But right away, I lost my breath, and all my hair stood up again. I felt like it was radiating anger straight at me. John asked if I saw it, but all I could do was point. So he rolled down his window and stuck his head out, and he called out to it, but the creature didn't move. And then he opened up his door and got out and whooped into the forest. And right then, a loud, angry growl, like I had never heard before in my life, came right back at him from the woods. John saw the creature as it raised its hand in the air and threw a large rock at the car, busting the headlight on his side. He jumped back in the car and popped it in reverse and kicked up rocks and gravel in the road as he peeled out of there. We got back to his house, pulled the car in the garage, and assessed the damage. Then we started hearing banging on the house and screams coming from outside, just like we heard on the road. Well, we looked at each other and headed to the gun room in the basement. John retrieved us both a gun and a rifle, and the banging got louder and more intense, and the screams were becoming deafening. We headed upstairs to the ground floor and went out the front door with our weapons pointed. John went left and I went right. We were going to meet up in the back of the house, and if we saw this creature, we agreed we would shoot it. We ran around the entire house and right into each other without either of us seeing anything, but we could still hear this thing screaming and banging around. We went inside through the back door and closed and locked it, and then went upstairs to their bonus room, which had a view of the front and left side and the rear of the property. There was a point at every window in that room that you could open it up, step out on the roof, and walk anywhere you wanted. And as soon as we got in the room, we realized the creature was screaming and banging around on the roof. John opened up one of the windows, pointed his gun, and fired 3 shots into the air. That's when my fight response kicked in. and I climbed out the window with the rifle in my hand. I turned to the left and started onto the roof, and I saw the creature standing there, staring at me. I froze in fear. At that moment, it seemed like time stood still, and I was sure that I was going to die. This thing's fists were clenched, and his arms looked like clubs, and he was growling and showing me his long, gangly teeth. Behind me, John climbed out the window too, and he saw me standing there frozen and pointing the rifle at the creature. And when John ran toward me, the creature started to charge. I pulled the trigger as fast as I could, and I fell backward. John grabbed me and hoisted me back to my feet and started firing at the creature while it was still charging us. He landed a shot in the creature's left leg, right shoulder, and forearm, and it let out a howl of pain. And I pulled my trigger again, this time hitting him twice in the chest. But it just kept coming at us, even after we had shot it. The creature jumped right over us and off the roof, and it landed on the earth like it was nothing. We heard him running back into the forest, screaming and growling as it went, crashing through the forest away from the house. Back inside the bonus room, we sat at opposite windows, holding our guns in hand and talking until we both passed out, sitting up. We woke up the next morning, both of us startled and looking out the windows to see if there was anything out there that shouldn't have been. But it all seemed clear, so we went out of the windows to look around on the roof to see if we could find blood. We did find a little, and John took pictures of them to prove to his dad that we weren't just messing around. Since then, I have lost contact with John and his family, and I no longer have access to those photos on the camera. But after we took pictures, we washed all the blood off the roof and the grass leading up to the tree line, and then we followed the path that the creature had made. We found its massive footprints and took photographs of them. We followed it all the way down to the water. That's where it disappeared. I stayed there another 3 nights with John at the house with absolutely no activity. We called his father and his mother and explained what had happened. And if it weren't for the pictures of the footprints and the blood, they would have never believed us. We never really spoke of it again, and this is the first time I'm telling of it since. I'm 29 years old, and I still dream of that night, and I wake up shivering. I hope you enjoyed the story. I'm not gonna lie, reliving that moment isn't exactly a pleasant experience, but I'd like my story to be out there. Thanks for listening this far. I appreciate you. Christmas is coming up. I know everybody's getting excited. Today is December 13, 2024. We've got about, 12 days before Christmas. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are. Let's all get in the Christmas spirit. Be good to everybody. Be a light to everybody. Breathe life into everybody you come across and display that Christmas spirit. I know they would appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the podcast. See you guys on the next one.